All right, so think about dating for a second.
Okay.
I bet there are at least a few things you think like, nope, absolutely not.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's someone's lifestyle or a specific habit, those non-starters.
Right.
But then there are other things that might just make you pause,
Uh-huh.
like something you'd prefer to avoid but wouldn't walk away from immediately.
Yeah, I get that.
So we're talking about deal breakers today.
Makes sense.
It's fascinating, this line we draw in relationships. But what does the science say about them?
Well, that's what's really interesting here.
Yeah.
It's like moving beyond just our gut feelings about deal breakers.
Right.
And actually looking at the research.
Well, exactly.
For this deep dive, you shared a really insightful study with me.
Oh, yeah.
Disqualifiers or preferences, how humans incorporate deal breakers into mate choice.
Interesting title.
From researchers at UC Santa Barbara and Oklahoma State University.
Wow, so this is serious research.
Yeah, and this goes beyond just listing what annoys us.
Right.
It delves into how these factors actually operate when we're looking for a partner.
Exactly. And what we want to figure out for you is this.
Okay.
When you think of your deal breakers, are they actually acting as these automatic no entry signs?
Like a bouncer?
Yeah, instantly disqualifying someone.
Okay.
Or are they more like factors that tilt the scales of attraction one way or another?
Interesting.
The researchers explore this through mate recognition.
So that's essentially who we even consider as a potential partner
Exactly.
versus mate evaluation.
Which is how we weigh the pros and cons of those potential partners.
Right. So like who makes it through the door
Uh-huh.
and then how do we actually size them up?
Yes.
Got it.
So connecting that back to like the bigger picture,
Okay.
we might have these firm ideas about what's unacceptable in a partner.
Yeah.
But this research suggests our decision-making might be more flexible than we think.
Oh, that's interesting.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is a deal breaker?
Yeah, what are we even talking about here?
Well, the study defines them right up front as unfavorable characteristics
Unfavorable. Okay.
or traits people avoid in potential mates.
So the stuff that comes up in dating conversations.
Yeah.
Like those things we declare we won't tolerate.
Exactly.
But the researchers point out something important here.
What's that?
They say that while we talk about deal breakers a lot, we haven't really examined how they function when we're actually choosing a partner.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's one thing to say it,
Right.
but another to actually see how it plays out.
Totally. So that raises a crucial question.
Okay, what is it?
When we encounter one of these unfavorable characteristics,
Right.
does it immediately eliminate someone from our consideration?
Ah, so is it an instant no?
Yeah, that's the idea of a disqualifier,
Okay.
acting like a gatekeeper.
Right.
So it controls who even enters that pool of potential partners in the first place.
Okay, I'm with you.
Or does it become a factor in how we rate their attractiveness?
So not a complete deal breaker, but it just knocks them down a peg.
Yeah, exactly. Functions more like a preference
I see.
during mate evaluation.
So that's all about how these things actually play out.
Exactly. And to figure that out, they did 2 studies.
Okay.
The first one focused on couples who had been together for a while.
Long term.
Yeah, long term. We're talking 144 heterosexual individuals.
Okay, pretty good sample size.
In 522 long-term cohabiting relationships in the U.S.,
Cohabiting, all right.
with an average relationship lasting almost 28 years.
So they've really made a choice
Yeah,
about who they want to be with.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the researchers wanted to see, what factors played out in these successful pairings.
That makes sense.
So they looked at a specific set of commonly mentioned deal breakers.
Like what?
Someone's race, their social class,
Social class meaning.
like whether they're from a working class background or an upper class background.
okay.
Their politics, education level, weight, religion, whether they smoked if they had children from a previous relationship, and their height.
Wow, that's a pretty comprehensive list.
Yeah. And they also considered age and sex,
Of course.
with the assumption of heterosexual preference as the baseline for sex,
Right.
and a self-reported acceptable age range.
So people basically said what they were looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's where it gets interesting.
Got it. I'm listening.
To see how these deal breakers were actually working, they used a method called couple simulation.
Couple simulation. What is that?
So imagine they created a computer model
Okay.
where each person in the study was represented by a digital agent.
An agent representing a real person.
Right. And each agent had their specific traits and reported deal breakers.
Got it.
Then they ran simulations to see who would end up paired together under different sets of rules.
Oh, so they're like playing matchmaker in the computer.
Yeah, kinda.
That's cool.
And the key was comparing two ways these deal breakers could function in the model.
Okay, I'm with you.
So in one scenario, if an agent had a trait that another agent listed as a deal breaker, their mate value was set to 0.
0 meaning?
They were immediately disqualified.
Oh, wow. Like totally out of the running.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
In the other scenario, having an unacceptable trait made them less appealing.
Okay.
But not completely disqualified.
I see.
So it reduced their overall mate value.
So they're still in the game.
Uh-huh.
But with a bit of a handicap.
Exactly. It acted like a preference, not an instant no.
Makes sense.
And then they compared which model, the disqualifier or the preference model, did a better job of matching up with the actual couples.
Oh, so they're seeing which model reflects reality better.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And the results were really telling.
What did they find?
For most of the traits like height, smoking, age, social class, politics, education, religion, weight, and having prior kids.
Wow, that's most of them.
Yeah, the model that treated these as preferences was way more accurate.
More accurate meaning.
It better predicted who ended up together in real life.
So even if someone said, I'd never date a smoker,
Right.
they might have ended up with one anyway.
Yeah, that's what the data suggests.
Yeah. Wow, so it's not as black and white as we think.
It seems that way.
That's really interesting.
And this was statistically significant, too.
Statistically significant.
It means the difference wasn't just random chance.
Oh, okay, so there's a real pattern there.
Exactly.
Wow.
So for you, this means,
Okay.
even though you might think, I'd never date someone with different politics, this research suggests that if you met someone amazing and you connected on a deep level,
Yeah.
but you disagreed politically, that difference might just make them slightly less attractive,
Okay.
not automatically disqualify them.
So it's less about a bouncer kicking someone out
Exactly.
and more about maybe not being your first choice at the bar.
Yeah, a much better analogy.
Huh.
So what's cool here is that it shows how we subtly weigh different characteristics.
Yeah.
It's not always a strict yes or no.
Right.
Someone's smoking habit or religion might make them less attractive,
But it doesn't mean you'd completely write them off.
especially if they have other great qualities.
Right, it's about the whole package.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Now, with race, the trend was similar.
Similar how?
The preference model fit the data better,
Good.
but the difference wasn't statistically significant.
So not as strong of a pattern.
Right. And that might be because of all these complex social factors, you know?
Yeah, like personal histories, social desirability bias in reporting things.
Right.
This type of modeling might not fully capture.
Yeah, it's a nuanced issue.
For sure.
But then there was the exception, sex.
Oh, interesting.
For this, the model where sex acted as a disqualifier,
Meaning people strongly prefer the opposite sex.
exactly, was significantly more accurate.
So that was a big deal breaker.
It seems so.
Interesting.
This suggests that, at least for this heterosexual group,
Right.
biological sex functions more as a fundamental requirement
Right.
for mate recognition.
So who they even can consider as a potential partner.
Exactly.
That makes sense though, right?
Yeah, I mean,
For someone who identifies as heterosexual, the same-sex partner isn't usually within their initial scope of romantic interest.
right.
So it makes sense that it would act as a filter from the start.
Exactly. And the first study shows that while many of our so-called deal breakers are more like preferences,
Right.
something like sex really does act as an initial filter.
Wow. So the first study gave us a lot to think about.
Definitely.
They didn't stop there, right?
Now, they did a second study.
Okay, cool. Tell me about it.
They wanted to see if these patterns held up in newer relationships.
Newer.
So, like,
Yeah.
where those deal breakers might have a more immediate impact.
Interesting. Okay.
So they had a different group this time, 518 heterosexual individuals who had been in their current relationship for less than 5 years.
Much shorter.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they made a few tweaks to their methods.
Like what?
They worded the questions differently
How so?
to focus more on traits that participants found unacceptable.
Oh, so really homing in on those deal breakers.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They also used a standardized way of measuring social class this time.
Okay, makes sense.
They didn't include age, since this was a younger group,
Right.
and they added political party affiliation as a potential deal breaker.
Ah, so getting even more specific with politics.
Yeah, exactly. And the big question was, did the trends from the long-term relationships show up in these newer ones?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, for the most part, yes.
Wait.
The findings were very similar to the first study
That's fascinating.
for race, height, smoking, social class, general politics, political party, education, religion, and weight.
So basically everything except age, and kids.
Yeah, the preference model was, again, more accurate in predicting the actual couples.
And these differences were still statistically significant, right?
Yep, a clear pattern there.
Amazing.
Now, for having kids, the trend was still towards preference.
Okay.
But it wasn't statistically significant in this second study.
So maybe having kids from a previous relationship matters less in newer relationships.
Yeah, it could be.
Interesting.
And what about sex?
The big one, yeah.
Did it still act as that initial disqualifier?
I'm curious, too.
Well, the trend still pointed in that direction.
Towards disqualifier.
Yeah, but the difference wasn't statistically significant this time.
Why not?
They think it might be because of the smaller sample size in the second study.
A smaller sample size means less statistical power.
Exactly.
So it might still be a strong factor,
right.
but they just couldn't detect it as clearly.
Yeah, that's what they think.
I see.
So we have 2 studies now,
Uh-huh.
and a pretty consistent picture emerging.
So what's the takeaway?
It seems our idea of deal breakers is these rigid rules
Right.
that instantly eliminate someone might not be totally accurate.
It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly.
I like it.
The main conclusion from both studies is that many of the things we call deal breakers actually function more like preferences.
Preferences, okay.
They contribute to our overall assessment of someone's desirability
Right.
rather than immediately disqualifying them.
It's like a sliding scale.
Yep.
Not an on-off switch.
Perfect analogy.
And this aligns with other research too, right?
Yeah, they mentioned a study that found that one deal breaker doesn't automatically lead to rejection.
Okay.
It seems we take in a lot of information.
Both good and bad.
Exactly. And then we decide how interested we are.
So it's a cumulative effect.
Yeah, multiple factors play into our attraction.
That makes a lot of sense.
But of course, there are limitations to this research.
So what are they?
Well, first, they only looked at a specific set of deal breakers.
Right.
There could be others that might actually be true disqualifiers.
Like what?
They mentioned severe hygiene issues or close genetic relatedness.
Oh, yeah. Those would probably be deal breakers for most people.
Probably.
And that's consistent with other research, too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
What else? They also point out that there might be deal breakers specific to certain communities.
Can you give me an example?
Like belonging to a rival political group in a small town.
Oh, yeah. That could be a big deal in a tight-knit community.
Right. And their study was national, so it might not have picked up on those local nuances.
Makes sense.
And another thing,
Huh.
they looked at past relationship choices based on deal breakers reported at the time of the study.
All right.
So it's possible people's deal breakers have changed since they first got together with their partner.
Yeah, our priorities can shift over time.
For sure.
Good point.
And lastly, the study focused on heterosexual couples and deal breakers that come up early on.
Okay, so there's definitely room for more research here.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, they suggest investigating how deal breakers factor into breakups.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Like if someone discovers a deal breaker in their partner after they're already committed.
How does that affect the relationship?
Exactly. There's already some research suggesting that those things are connected.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
So for you listening, the big takeaway here is this.
Okay.
What we think are non-negotiable deal breakers
Right.
might actually be more like preferences.
They just influence our attraction.
Exactly. And the exception seems to be biological sex.
That one seems to be a true deal breaker.
At least for the people in these studies.
Makes you wonder, though,
About what?
if we're too rigid with our deal breakers,
Ah,
are we missing out on potentially great connections?
that's a good question for our listeners to think about.
Yeah. Being more open to different types of people
Mm-hmm.
lead to more fulfilling relationships.
Yes, that's something I think we all need to consider.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has.
We've only scratched the surface of human mate choice.
There's so much more to explore
And we hope this has given you a new perspective on deal breakers.
and a better understanding of the science behind attraction.
Exactly, because it's clearly more complicated than we think.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.